Street Fighter VI marked new beginnings for the series. This would be the game that, even if temporarily, didn't deal with its main antagonist M. Bison or his organization Shadaloo after the fall of M. Bison to Ryu in Street Fighter V. Who would be the one to stand in the player's way of achieving their goals? Antagonists like Sagat or Akuma weren't monsters like Bison and couldn't fill that position, while others like Seth and Gil seemed to be caught up in their own affairs to retake the center stage. You know what, maybe more Seth than Gil. This is where we get introduced to JP, the mysterious new villain that has taken a hold of Bison's psycho power for himself. What makes JP different than the rest? Well, of all villains in fighting games that succeed through brute force, JP takes an interesting spin on fighting game bosses, being that JP has set himself up to be a long-term problem without ever having to lay a finger or be the tyrants that other fighting game villains are. So let's talk about JP, and compare him to villains of the past, and discuss why does he change the pace for the fighting game villain formula, stepping forward for fighting games. To give a quick background on JP was the head of financial management in Shadaloo and Bison's organization, being one of the few people to be able to harness Bison's ability of Psycho Power, a corrupted version of another ability, Soul Power. When Shadaloo collapsed in Street Fighter V, this led JP to venture on the world and start many businesses under the fake names of Johan Petrovich or John Felipe, mainly keeping the same initials in all of his aliases, JP. While doing all of these and being the leader of an NGO, JP on the flip side is the leader of a group called Amnesia, a group of terrorists that hide in the shadows and manipulate the media to make them look away from their crimes. He's also orchestrating remnants of Shadaloo under the name Neo Shadaloo, which are made up of remaining Bison loyalists trying to continue Bison's vision, although this isn't his biggest concern at the moment because Neo Shadaloo is divided on what they want to do going forward. So mainly it's just JP focusing on his main businesses. What makes JP different from other fighting game bad guys of the past? Think of JP similar to Yoshikage Kira from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The spotlight is good and all, but JP realized through M. Bison's mistakes that if he were to have control of the world like Bison envisioned, he would have to do it in the shadows, pulling the strings in the back and controlling the masses without ever hinting at his existence. He still has a massive ego, and considering him being a billionaire, what billionaire wouldn't? But compared to other villains like Shao Kahn, Shang Tsung, and the Mishimas, they all flaunt how powerful they are or how great they are. And of course, JP feels that way, but he's satisfied with seeing the results for himself rather than publicly announcing them to others. Before meeting our player, JP was responsible for the political and economic downfall of Neyshal, one of the major areas in the game's story mode, a third world country that was receiving aid from an NGO JP owned. It was here in the comic Days of Eclipse that we see how dangerous JP is without ever having to reveal himself or lay a finger on anyone. Amidst the backdrop of a high-profile fighting tournament meant to shine a beacon of hope on the struggling nation of Neyshal, a sinister plot unfolded beneath the surface. JP had more in mind than just raising funds and goodwill for the people. Behind the scenes, he meticulously framed the tournament's main investor and his co-partner of the event, Ken Masters, for a series of devastating attacks that rocked Neyshal. Using cutting-edge deepfake technology, JP fabricated photorealistic evidence depicting Ken as a co-conspirator with violent extremists. When the doctored footage was made public, Ken's world crumbled, and the hopeful image of Neyshal was shattered, replaced by the terrifying reputation of a new ground for terrorism. With the public turning against him and the weight of his fabricated accusations suffocating both his professional and personal life, Ken was left no choice but to eventually surrender. The once promising country of Neyshal descended into chaos, its rise now tainted by the shadow of terrorism. But JP's scheme didn't end there. With Ken out of the picture, he seized control of the tournament's funds, money intended to uplift and support the people of Neyshal, and funneled it into his own pockets, laundering resources and money and bleeding the nation dry. Although Ken would eventually be legally cleared of the charges months later, JP's web of lies and deceit continued to weave itself into the fabric of the nation's political landscape, with his narrative of rising terrorism still fueling fear and chaos and allowing him to secretly pull the nation's strings. However, there are some trying to fight this. Kalima, JP's former assistant, who had once believed in his grand vision for Neyshal's future, was shocked when she discovered the truth, that JP had not only framed Ken, but betrayed the very people he pretended to uplift. Her loyalty shattered. In a cruel twist of fate, she was both figuratively and literally stabbed in the back. Her hope for Naishal's future dying alongside her people and Ken's now ruined reputation as she bled out on the floor defenseless. She joined the Freedom Fighters and eventually became their leader, a new resistance rising to free Naishal from JP's iron grip, determined to undo the damage he had caused. However, as time has went on, the Freedom Fighters got desperate, committing acts of terrorism similar to the ones JP orchestrated. Now, Amnesia doesn't even have to lift a finger, because the Freedom Fighters themselves have listed themselves as such. The misinformation, the violence. It's all consumed Naishal whole, and now all JP has to do is be comfortable and relax. Yeah, it's pretty dark. A concept like this is something you'd usually see in another game, like maybe Black Ops or Metal Gear Solid, something with a tone much more serious than something that in comparison might seem a little lighthearted like fighting games. It's also probably the darkest turn of events you can have for someone so lighthearted like Ken, one of the most iconic player 2s up there with Luigi. The concepts of deepfake AI being used to fake crimes, using terrorism as a means to boost political power, and every other thing he does is something that you'd never usually see in a game where people can throw fireballs at each other. And Bison is evil, but he wouldn't waste his time doing all the things that JP did to reach the top. He'd rather charge headfirst onto Naishal and be its victor than spend the time to slowly gain power over it, and that goes for villains similar like Shao Kahn or Kazuya. If you were to put any other villain in JP's shoes, they would have just destroyed it and made it its own. The only few that maybe would try something similar would be someone like Shang Tsung, Geese Howard, or Heihachi. But even then, they have the tendency to constantly flaunt their abilities to the public, making them a target. JP really is only different because JP isn't one-dimensional in his planning compared to his peers. He's evil 100%, but he's logical in his thinking and doesn't need to be constantly in battle to prove his point. And it's really what makes him interesting. He even flat out tells the player that strength doesn't matter now.
This I impart unto you. Strength is meaningless. You must be disappointed.
And in a way, he's very much so right. His problems aren't just a you can beat him and move on issue. He has stuck his hand really deep into the politics of Naishal, and he doesn't need to flaunt his powers to prove it because he can see the chaos for himself and be content with what he's doing. It's not about the journey to him, it's the destination. And JP is very determined to make it there without compromising anything.
So I've been thinking about strength, man.
Now, when you play through Street Fighter 6's main story mode, you're introduced to JP through what happened to a friend of yours, Bosch, that gets turned mad after being injected with psycho power, leading you down the rabbit hole of affairs that happen in his home country, Naishal. As you try to find him and a way to help him, you find out the reason you met him all the way back in Luke's training course was because Bosch was part of the Freedom Fighters led by Kalima. Now, it's really hard to say it as it is really wild without the context of the main story mode, but long story short, we're trying to defuse a bomb. Turns out, in our hunt for our friend and in the pursuit of strength, we have put ourselves in a direction we didn't think we'd know, as Bosch was a member of the Freedom Fighters, and the Freedom Fighters have gotten extremely desperate, to the point where Bosch is planning to enter the tournament and use a tampered championship belt as a bomb to sacrifice his life for his people and taking JP with him, which they believe will free Naishal of JP's grasp. Although the Freedom Fighters see the joy in this plan and for Bosch's honor as a warrior, our player realizes how insane it is and couldn't believe they were fooled by the Freedom Fighters in thinking they had their best interest in Bosch, and decides they have to try to save Bosch's life. So we manage to find the failsafe to the device and we locate the bomb to install it, but that's when in the shadow a presence was looming over us.
Unimpressive belt, isn't it? No intrinsic material value, nor artistic value, for that matter. The true value of a champion's belt is found instead in the person recognized to be worthy of wearing it. Surely you must agree.
JP catches us off guard and introduces himself to us, being polite but still keeping his control over the situation. He's not a moron though, as he 100% is here because he saw you tamper with the belt. But secretly, before you know it, you're already part of JP's new plan. He talks about the belt and how excited he is to work with you if you're entering as one of its competitors. He hopes that you will bring sportsmanship and good spirits for the tournament, and he sends you on your way to get ready. But he knows something's up, and doesn't follow you as you leave the room. When we get to the tournament, JP is celebrating in the tournament's grand opening ceremony. He holds the belt high to his competitors, keeping the facade as he raises it. But you, the player, recognize Bosch is about to snap right at him then and there. Whatever happens at the tournament is gonna be going sour real soon. And soon, strength might be too big for you, the player, to hold. Through it all, you and Bosch make it to the finals, and regardless of who wins the fight, the ceremony still takes place. All the pieces are in play. However, this is when JP plays the ace in his sleeve. The fact that he knows the bomb functions. Indirectly, you've saved his life and stopped what could have been a catastrophic event. But he's about to make it your problem that he's still alive.
It would be my honor. However, I feel it's an honor that would be better entrusted to our wonderful dancer here. Go on.
The bomb goes off. In a panic, everyone runs, and you're left in the arena mourning Bosch. JP approaches you and tells you, "Yeah, the bomb? You helped me there. I thought that belt was pretty crappy, but clearly I was wrong. I thank you sincerely. It was quite fun, actually." Basically mocking you. And he just walks away. But you, the player, are very much so frustrated at him, so you charge straight at him, in which he realizes, why not amuse himself? And thus, the game's final battle begins. And when you beat JP, he gets up and calls your bluff.
Congratulations. You have defeated me. And now what? What does this victory represent to you? Justice? Strength? The end of something? Or the beginning? And now what? None of this means anything at all.
He congratulates you for winning your little bout, but making sure you know you didn't do anything for the matter. Did fighting me make you feel better? Don't think this solves your problems. The camera's off, no one recorded this fight, so there's no proof this happened. You don't have the basis to beat JP legally. He is very much so stacked, and his paper talks more than his hands. And Bosch is still dead. Other fighting game villains would announce their defeat or have their organizations crumble within them, or something extremely dramatic. But JP straight up calls your bluff and leaves. There is no, "Alright guys, we've been bussin' together, yeah!" Your character and you is left undecided, unfulfilled, and your friend is still dead. And JP leaves satisfied because he can just label this as another terrorist attack on Nashao from its freedom fighters, and continue to void responsibility on himself, and continue to pump the nation dry as it repeats the same cycle. We lost. He won. And that's basically it for the story, unfortunately. The door is left open for a possible DLC, but as it stands, your player ultimately became a pawn in a game they didn't know they were playing. And that goes back to our original question. What makes JP so different than the rest? JP is what the standard is for most other bad guys from other franchises, but brought into the world of fighting games. An unknown threat to many, and a brick in the wall unless they figure out how to deal with him without using their fists. He brings an interesting twist to the formula by simply not being a one-dimensional video game boss, and having a deep, complex issue when facing him. From political corruption to media manipulation, he's a real big bad, as he as a boss gets to stay in the shadows as he controls the strings. Truth be told, with Bison being back, he probably won't last as the main villain, but it kind of encourages other fighting game bosses to keep their villains around for the long run. Not in the style of the Mishimas constantly coming back from death, but as in have him be a villain build obstacles for the main protagonists to overcome. Hopefully in a new DLC or other things we get to see more of JP, but for now, this chapter closes. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching. If you actually enjoyed it, leave a like, a comment, a share, subscribe, and share it. If, people actually care about fighting game lore. Because, there's always those certain people that talk about, it's not that important. To my recent subscribers that came from my Metal Gear video, thank you for your continued support. I had a hectic September, so this really didn't come out at the exact date I'd like, but I'm just overall happy that it's done. So thank you guys again, and I'll see you in the next one. I have a ton of video scripts that I wrote during my vacation, and I'm excited to work on those. And I really hope that you'll be here for the long run. Thank you guys so much.